This success would not have been possible without the huge collaborative effort put in by the production team over the years, but most of all because of the loyalty and appreciation of our fans who have kept watching in ever-increasing...
Nobody expected that inside Edd China's garage sits over a century of motoring history. Inside, there are cars over a century old, a Range Rover that refuses to heat up in winter, a van with a wiring problem decades in the making, and something under a cover that even he won't talk about. How did Edd China end up with all of this on his hands? And what exactly is under that cover? Join us as we find out what they found inside Edd China's garage. The garage nobody sees. The garage looked nothing like the YouTube channel suggested. There was a forklift in the corner that had never moved under its own power, its engine sitting in a crate beside it since the day it arrived. Two Cadillacs, one from 1916, one from 1918, were gathering dust against the back wall. A Range Rover stood open with a pile of broken plastic fittings on the workbench next to it. At the far end, something sat under a cover that nobody was being told about. Ed walked past all of it on the way to the bench, thermals on under his work clothes in a building with no heating. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that both Cadillacs were younger than the car he had been driving the previous weekend, and moved on without explaining it. Workshop Diaries had been running on YouTube since April 2021, over 60 episodes, and it had never really been what it was supposed to be. It drifted into a magazine show, sometimes a documentary, always polished, and the actual day-to-day reality of the workshop had never made it to camera. Ed had left Wheeler Dealers in 2017 after 13 seasons and 135 restored cars, a show watched by 300 million people across more than 200 countries because the new production team wanted to cut the technical detail to save time and money. He believed that detail was the only thing that made the show worth watching, and without it, his name would stay on something he no longer recognized. What Ed had not anticipated was the fallout that followed. Within days of going public about his departure from Wheeler Dealers, Mike Brewer called to tell him that his wife and daughter were receiving death threats. Viewers, angered by Ed's decision, had targeted Brewer's family despite never having met them. They were being blamed for choices that were entirely Ed's own. The threats ranged from abusive messages to explicit warnings, creating real fear and distress. Ed had expected criticism of himself, but not harassment aimed at his colleagues' loved ones. The scale and intensity of the response shocked him completely. 9 years on, this cold garage was what that choice had produced. Before the episode moved forward, Ed named 5 things: a Rover V8 that needed measuring before anyone could decide whether to rebuild it, a forklift engine in worse condition than hoped, a Range Rover warm everywhere except where it mattered, a van with 2 decades of complicated history, and whatever was under that cover. He made no promises about how many would be resolved. The Rover V8 had spent years inside a Range Rover that went hard, off-road, and nobody had ever measured what that had cost it. But getting an answer required a part that did not exist yet. Was this engine even worth rebuilding? What the engine had been through. John's Range Rover had been used hard. Years of off-road work, rough ground, the kind of use most vehicles do not survive intact. And the Rover V8 that had powered it through all of that was a light aluminum engine that Land Rover had been fitting to its vehicles for decades. There were known issues, and some maintenance had been done, but what the engine was actually capable of producing in 2026, after everything it had been through, was something nobody could say without measuring it. Ed's approach was to put it on a dynamometer before touching a single bolt to get real torque and horsepower figures that would serve as a baseline for the entire rebuild. Those numbers would tell him where the engine stood before any decisions were made about what to replace and what to keep. and give him something to compare the rebuilt engine against once the work was done. Getting the engine connected to the dyno turned out to be its own problem. Because John's Range Rover had been an automatic, the engine had come out with a flex plate rather than a flywheel. A flex plate being a thinner, slightly flexible disc designed to work with a torque converter. A dynamometer needs something solid and rigid to connect to, which meant Edd needed a flywheel that would actually fit this particular engine. He sourced a second-hand flywheel from a Range Rover or Discovery. He was not completely certain which, and it arrived still carrying hardware from whatever it had last been bolted to. Edd stripped it back to the bare plate, offered it up to the crankshaft, and checked the bolt pattern. If it did not line up, the entire dyno plan stopped right there. If it did, the flywheel went to a machine shop to have the dyno-specific holes drilled, and the engine test moved one step closer. Across the workshop, a different engine problem had been running for longer. The forklift had arrived as part of a transaction. Edd had sold a porta-cabin, and the buyers had a forklift they wanted to move on, so they delivered it to the workshop. When it arrived, the engine was sitting in a crate balanced on the forks, and the forks themselves had been removed and were leaning against a wall separately. The machine had stayed in exactly that state ever since, because it could not move until someone rebuilt the engine. That someone was Nick, who had spent years managing a small engineering workshop for Hammersmith and Fulham Adult Education in London. The program worked with young people between 14 and 19 who were dealing with difficult circumstances and used practical skills, mechanics, welding, bicycle maintenance, and fabrication as a way of giving them focus and a route into skilled work. A significant number came through with no interest in engineering and left wanting to pursue it. The program was wound up at the end of August 2025, and Nick was made redundant. A few weeks later, he was at the Classic Collective event in Bicester, where a mutual contact, Dominic Taylor Lane, introduced him to Edd. The conversation that followed led directly to Nick showing up at the workshop, and by the time this episode was filmed, he was deep into the forklift engine, working through all 4 cylinders with a honing tool to remove the scoring and rust patches that had built up across them. The bore damage was real, but not catastrophic. The honing tool had cleaned away most of the surface rust and left the walls reasonably smooth, without dips or ridges that would prevent a piston from seating. Whether the new pistons from the rebuild kit would seal against the honed bores was still open, and behind it was a more fundamental problem. The kit had been ordered against an engine number, but if whoever had previously worked on this engine had fitted non-standard pistons, the parts in the kit would be the wrong size entirely, and every hour Nick had just spent on those bores would be wasted. The pistons either fit or they do not. But back in the workshop, something Edd drove every single day has stopped working. What was wrong with it? Everything works, sort of. The Land Rover L 322 Edd drove every day had dual-zone climate control, heated seats, a heated steering wheel, and an Eberspecher auxiliary heater in the engine bay that could be triggered remotely before he even left the house. He had driven to Nottingham and back on a freezing day, several hours each way, with the climate system running and producing no heat at all, kept warm only by the seat beneath him, while everything around him stayed as cold as the air outside. He had been working through the problem for weeks by the time this episode was filmed. Land Rover had used a specific plastic throughout the cooling circuit, fittings, connectors, and clips, which became soft and brittle after years of heat cycling, with no visible warning before they failed. Edd reached for a connector to check it, and it came apart in his hand. He put it on the workbench with the others, a pile of fittings that had already been replaced once during this job, and kept going. Every component he touched to trace the fault either broke or revealed another broken one behind it. He had confirmed the Eberspecher pump was running and that water was circulating on one side of the system. He He had worked through the airlocks using the procedure from the manufacturer's service documentation. Somewhere between that side of the system and the heater matrix, the flow stopped, and he had not been able to identify exactly where. The car was going home cold again that evening. The T5 van nearby had its own long and complicated history. Edd had originally been given a well-specified version: 174 horsepower, 6-speed gearbox, proper double-slam rear doors, but that van was written off when his wife was driving it on the motorway near Stokenchurch with a trailer behind. A gust of wind caught the trailer. It started to snake, and she could not bring it back under control in time. The van hit the Armco barriers and a phone box, and she walked away unhurt, while the van itself was beyond saving. Rather than start from scratch, Edd found a lower-spec shell that had sustained engine damage but was otherwise intact, and it had electric windows, air conditioning, and heated mirrors that the wrecked van did not have. He moved the running gear across. The two vans were a year apart in production, which was enough to make the wiring looms incompatible in several places, and the transplant far more complicated than it should have been. When the job was finished, one wire remained that Edd could not place, so he tucked it out of the way and moved on. That was approaching 20 years ago, and the van had not had a single electrical fault since. The bumper was currently sitting on the floor, removed during a short winter maintenance film for eBay. With a large trailer available and the Range Rover serving as the primary tow vehicle, the van had become redundant in the workshop's day-to-day operation, and selling it was the most likely outcome. 3 of the 5 things were covered. None of them was fixed, and somewhere to the south, a car that was older than anything else in this story by nearly 90 years had just spent a day being driven hard in the cold. So did it make it? The oldest race car. The London to Brighton Veteran Run had been held every November since 1904, organized by the RAC to mark the 1896 repeal of the law that had required a person to walk in front of every motor vehicle on public roads. When that law went, a group of motorists drove from London to Brighton to mark it, and the run has been repeating that journey ever since, the oldest continuously held motoring event in the world. The London to Brighton Veteran Run had one rule: it had to be built before 1905. No support vehicles, no outside assistance. 55 miles of public road from Hyde Park to the Brighton seafront under your own power. Or you stopped where you stopped. The run had marked that standard every November since 1904, the oldest continuously held motoring event in the world. The car Edd drove was a 1904 Peugeot, 9 horsepower, no roof, no windscreen, nothing between the 4 people in it and the November air. 121 years old at the time of the run, the 2 Cadillacs gathering dust back in his workshop, at 108 and 110 years old, were both too young to qualify. He ran it fully loaded, 4 people aboard, from Hyde Park south through London and out into the countryside on a cold but clear morning. Clayton Hill is where the run separates. It is a long, uneven climb, steep enough that machines at or near their limit begin to labor and slow, and some of them stop altogether. For a 122-year-old car carrying 4 people, the reasonable expectation was that something would show: the engine straining, the pace dropping, someone having to step out and push to reduce the load. The Peugeot climbed it without any of that. The engine did not pull hard, did not overheat on the way up, and did not indicate that 4 people aboard made the slightest difference. Whatever condition that engine was in, it had more in reserve than Clayton Hill needed. Later in the run, the clutch stiffened, not enough to stop progress, but enough that it needed working through carefully. And as the car came in sight of Brighton, a thread of steam appeared near the top of the engine. Edd kept going, came off the main road, followed the route down to the seafront, and crossed the finish line with the car still running under its own power. The Peugeot belonged to a private owner, available through Tom Parrott, for around £175,000. Edd had driven it for the day and brought it home. His guests included Lady Judy McAlpine and friends from Carfest. The footage had been on his other social channels for some time, but was reaching YouTube here for the first time. The London to Brighton veteran run had one rule: all vehicles must be built before 1905, or it won't take part in the race. No support vehicles, no outside assistance. 55 miles of public road from Hyde Park to the Brighton seafront under your own power, or you stopped where you stopped. The run had marked that standard every November since 1904, the oldest continuously held motoring event in the world. The car Edd drove was a 1904 Peugeot, 9 horsepower, no roof, no windscreen, nothing between the 4 people in it and the November air. 121 years old at the time of the run. The 2 Cadillacs gathering dust back in his workshop at 108 and 110 years old were both too young to qualify. He ran it fully loaded, 4 people aboard, from Hyde Park South through London and out into the countryside on a cold but clear morning. Clayton Hill is where the run separates. It is a long, uneven climb, steep enough that machines at or near their limit begin to labor and slow, and some of them stop altogether. For a 122-year-old car carrying 4 people, the reasonable expectation was that something would show: the engine straining, the pace dropping, someone having to step out and push to reduce the load. The Peugeot climbed it without any of that. The engine did not pull hard, did not overheat on the way up, did not give any indication that 4 people aboard made the slightest difference. Whatever condition that engine was in, it had more in reserve than Clayton Hill needed. Later in the run, the clutch stiffened, not enough to stop progress, but enough that it needed working through carefully. And as the car came in sight of Brighton, a thread of steam appeared near the top of the engine. Edd kept going, came off the main road, followed the route down to the seafront, and crossed the finish line with the car still running under its own power. The Peugeot belonged to a private owner, available through Tom Parrott for around £175,000. Edd had driven it for the day and brought it home. His guests included Lady Judy McAlpine and friends from Carfest. The footage had been on his other social channels for some time, but was reaching YouTube here for the first time. 4 down, 1 left, and the one still waiting had been sitting under that cover longer than any of the other projects, with 2 videos in production and not a single word offered about what it was. What was Edd hiding? The cover and what comes next. The covered car had been in the workshop long enough to become background furniture, visible for a second in wide shots of other videos, always sheeted, never mentioned, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. By early 2026, 2 videos about it were being made, one close to finished and one that had barely been started, with no release date on either. Edd was not going to say what was under the cover. During filming, he walked over to it, straightened one corner of the sheet without lifting any of it, and walked away. That was the full extent of what was on offer. The cover stayed on, the question stayed open, and the only thing Edd offered was a challenge. Put your best guess in the comments. Alongside everything else running in the workshop, a short film had been made for eBay covering electric vehicle qualifications. What certifications existed in 2026 for mechanics wanting to work on EVs? What the training routes looked like in practice? And what was actually required before someone could work on high-voltage systems safely? The film had included what Edd described as some genuinely daft material alongside the practical content, and it had been out on other platforms before being pointed to here for the YouTube audience. Electric vehicles had been running through Edd's work for years before workshop diaries existed. The project most people knew about W as the world record electric ice cream van, a converted vehicle that set a top speed record, and in the process led Edd to develop a soft-serve ice cream machine capable of running entirely from an electric drivetrain. Top Gear had subsequently broken the record, lifting the benchmark to 99 miles per hour, and Edd's response was already taking shape in the form of an electrified classic, Bedford CF1, built to take it back, a project that had not yet appeared on the channel. Nick had established himself in the workshop and was working through the forklift engine methodically. His television series, Inside the Classic Car Garage, filmed at a garage in Enfield, had completed one season to a strong audience response, with people stopping both Nick and Edd separately to ask when a second series was coming. That decision rested with the broadcaster, and while it was being made, Nick was in Buckinghamshire honing cylinder bores. Earl had completed the 2 jobs he had taken on for Edd's trailer, replacing the jockey wheel that Edd had managed to destroy with an enthusiasm well beyond ordinary wear, and fitting a new electric winch that had already been used manually before the wiring was finished to haul the 2006 Range Rover onto the trailer during the parts stripping operation. The electrical connection remained incomplete, which Earl had declined to apologize for because wiring was not his department. John had been working through Edd's old 2006 Range Rover all week, the one bought at 80,000 miles and driven to within a few thousand of $250,000 before the plastic thermostat housing disintegrated on the M6, while Edd was towing the ice cream van in heavy rain, blowing both head gaskets and ending the car's working life on the hard shoulder. Everything useful was coming out before the shell went to a breaker. The Rover Vi 8 was coming back from the machine shop before it could be tested. The forklift bores were as clean as Nick could get them, without knowing yet whether the pistons were the right size. The Range Rover was going home cold again. The van was heading toward a sale listing, and at the far end of the workshop, the one story that had not been told was getting closer to being ready, under its cover, where it had been since the beginning. Edd China walked away from the biggest car show on the planet in 2017 because he refused to let the quality be cut. Was leaving Wheeler Dealers the right call, and do you think there is any part of him that wonders what would have happened if he had stayed? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.